Hi, welcome to Women's Health. I am Jeanne Schumacher, co-founder of the Pregnancy Advantage, where we help women to get their bodies pregnant ready. Or if you're having trouble conceiving, especially before going down that in vitro fertilization rabbit hole, very expensive. My partner today is Dr. Debra Shapiro. She's a board certified OBGYN, and it is Breast Cancer Awareness Month, and we're continuing this very, very important conversation. So, Debra, are you ready to take it away?
Yes, absolutely. Hi, everyone. I'm very happy to be here. We've been talking about breast cancer prevention, and I'm trying to make sure that we didn't leave anything out. We talked about major ways that you can reduce your risk of breast cancer, and some of them go together, right? So maintain a healthy weight, exercise, don't drink alcohol, and eat a plant-based diet. And of course, eating a plant-based diet is going to help you maintain a healthy weight, and not drinking excessive alcohol is going to keep you from gaining weight as well. And exercises, a lot of it has to do with our fat cells that are little estrogen factories and feed cancers. But beyond that, so now we're going a little bit past that. We were talking about breast cancer screening and using mammography or not, and the risks and the benefits of that. And we talked about that in detail, and you can look for our first video on that. But one thing I didn't get to talk about last time, I think I might have mentioned it, but didn't really talk about it, was thermography. Some people might have heard about breast thermography. It's this idea that you would use heat sensor to determine whether the cells were turning over quickly, or that there were a lot of blood cells. Where there's tumors, there's going to be more angiogenesis, or bringing nutrients to tumors because they grow fast. So it sounds like a really good idea. The problem is that there actually have never been any good studies that show that these thermograms, as they're called, really help to detect breast cancer or prevent breast cancer deaths. So we don't recommend using thermography. It's not really certainly in this country, and I don't know about abroad, but we're not using thermography at all. So it's mammograms, ultrasounds, and MRIs if you're at high risk. I've talked in the past about Dr. Christy Funk's book. It's here. It's a wonderful book, Breast and Owner's Manual. She was writing in this book that there will be about 3.2 million breast cancer cases by 2050, which is doubling in the rate in 40 years. And we don't really know exactly why. A lot of it probably has to do with diet and lifestyle, though, because we know that diet and lifestyle can account for, well, at least 30 to 40% of cancers. So we've talked about the plant food diet, the whole food plant-based diet, exercise. And I just want to talk a little bit more about exercise, because not only does it help to prevent breast cancer, but it also improves survival after a diagnosis. It helps us to maintain a healthy weight, but it also reduces your risk in other ways, because it improves your insulin resistance, reducing fat cells and reducing the cytokines, the inflammatory compounds, and the hormones that are produced by fat cells as well. Things like leptin and insulin-like growth factor 1 and interleukin 6, so things like that. And also, if you remove some fat cells from your body, then you're going to be reducing aromatase, the hormone aromatase, which produces estrogen. So exercise is very important, and really aerobic exercise. So if you could really step it up and try to get some exercise every day, or at least 5 days a week, where you're really getting some sweating going and get your heart rate up, that would be very helpful, even more than just sort of strolling. Although anything you can do would be helpful. But if you want to significantly reduce your risk, then it would be to do more vigorous exercise. And alcohol, really, I would just strive to keep it at less than a glass a day. And if you're at average risk, and once you've had breast cancer, I would find an alternative that makes you feel good, like green tea. I mean, I just wouldn't drink alcohol, and I'd find an alternative to relaxing. And this morning, actually, we did a wonderful Facebook Live with another plant-based doctor, Christina Miller, and she was also reiterating that it's important to think about why you drink and what could be a good alternative for shifting your mood. Maybe it's taking a bath, maybe it's going in a hot tub, maybe it's going for a walk or getting some exercise, maybe it's doing some deep breathing and some meditation, but anything that you can do that could remove the need to put something in your body that's actually potentially causing harm. So what else could we do? What else could we modify in our lives that could affect our risk of breast cancer? Well, one thing is when you have children. So if you can have children at a younger age, as opposed to waiting, if you wait until 35 for your first pregnancy, there is about a 40% increase in breast cancer compared to women without kids. And having children younger is going to decrease your risk of breast cancer. And also breastfeeding is going to decrease your risk of breast cancer. And on the other side of life, there's menopause. And it was shown in the Women's Health Initiative study that if you used Prempro, which is Premarin with Provera, which is an artificial progestin, for over 5 years, you were going to be increasing your risk of breast cancer slightly. Not a huge amount, but you would be increasing your risk of breast cancer. And it was so significant in the study that they actually had to stop that arm of the study where they were giving postmenopausal women Prempro because of that increased risk that they saw. Interestingly, if you would just take estrogen alone, Premarin alone, without the progestin, let's say you don't have a uterus and you don't need the progestin, they didn't see that increased risk in breast cancer. Interesting, but regardless of what you may think about that study, it's not going to be repeated. That's what we have. And so, now we really do try, in most of my patients, really don't stay on hormone replacement therapy at the usual dose for more than 5 years unless they absolutely have to. Sometimes you can get people onto a very low dose and just sort of wean down to whatever makes you comfortable. Again, you have to weigh the risks and benefits. So if you're completely miserable, then, and life isn't worth living because you're just, you're drenched in sweat every few minutes, and you'd have to be on hormone replacement therapy. But there are some alternatives, and we can talk about that at another time. And then there's some environmental risks. And so we wanted to talk about that as well. And one is radiation. And when we think about, radio waves they damage your DNA. They cause DNA damage. And there's no question that radiation causes DNA damage. The question is, how much radiation exposure do you have control over, and how much is really, really important? Because, there's radiation exposure from the sun, and that's, we don't want to get too much, you don't want to get burned, but we don't really think that being out in the sun is going to be increasing your risk of cancer. In fact, since it increases your vitamin D level, it's actually, and having a healthy vitamin D level between probably 40 and 70, increases your immune system and reduces your risk of all cancers. So, you can't say that solar radiation is, across the board dangerous. On the other hand, there's absolutely no reason for you to be keeping your cell phone on in a breast pocket, right next to your breast. I know that I've worked with midwives, and I've known people who have lots of different people who like to put their cell phone into their bras. I would not do that. There's absolutely no reason to do that. It's the same reason that we tell men, especially men who are trying to get people pregnant, that you don't want to keep your cell phone in your front pocket, next to your testicles. Because not only just for the heat, but also for the radiation. And when you have your keys in there as well, I'm sort of going off the subject to men, but when you have your keys in your pocket along with the cell phone, it sort of increases the damage to the DNA in your sperm. So for the same reason, I just would not keep a cell phone in my bra at all. And then, of course, stress is always it's interesting they didn't talk about that with the 4 ways to reduce your risk of cancer, but stress plays a huge role in their lifespan and in their health span. And learning how to manage stress is extremely important. I know we know this from studies that Dean Ornish has done with reversing heart disease. He definitely talked about stress management every day. People were not only had a support group, but they were also doing some either meditation or yoga to reduce stress. I think 5 or 6 days a week, in addition to once a week support group. So managing stress and having that personal connection with your community or with your family is very, very important to keep you healthy. And the healthiest people in the blue zones, one of the things that they talk about in the blue zones were 5 places in the world where people live the longest. Not only their plant-based diet, and the first they all eat legumes, they all have nuts in it, and they're all physically active. But in addition, they all have a very strong sense of community and belonging in a community. So I think you cannot overstress the importance of stress and stress management when it comes to living a long and healthy life. And lastly, I wanted to just mention also a little bit about aluminum antiperspirants. Aluminum is a metal that we don't need. I mean, there's certain metals that we do use. I mean, iron we need, absolutely iron. And you need a little bit of copper. There's some things that you need, but there's some metals that are in the world like arsenic and aluminum and mercury. They have no place in our bodies. They don't have any function at all. So where do we find aluminum? Well, you can find aluminum in baking powder. So I would definitely because it keeps it from caking. So get aluminum-free baking powder if you're a baker. I'm not saying that that would be a huge, but it could over the years, if you were having this baked goods and things with aluminum containing baking powder. But the main thing when I think about breast cancer is aluminum antiperspirants. And I was using actually Mitchum for women for many, many, many years. And there's studies that go both ways about this, but in fact, aluminum can make cancer cells grow. And it's not so much that it's getting into intact skin, but the problem about our underarms is that a lot of women, I'm certainly one of them, is shaving. So we're shaving, maybe we don't shave every day, but you shave. And after you shave, you have actually caused nicks and cuts in the skin, micro tears in the skin. And that would allow the aluminum to get absorbed at a much greater rate. So you can look on nutritionfacts.org. He has a series of videos about aluminum and aluminum antiperspirants, in particular about breast cancer. And I think it's interesting. I mean, it may not be, I'm not saying, the bottom line is there's no need for aluminum in our diets. It's not like iodine. It's not, you don't need it for your thyroid. You do not need it. It's like mercury, it's like arsenic. So you just don't need it. So one of the places you can find it is in these aluminum containing antiperspirants. And even though it may not get absorbed readily from intact skin, it is absorbed when you shave and the skin has been nicked. So, and there's increased exposure and increased absorption. So there are lots of, first of all, if you eat a plant-based diet, you may notice that you don't even smell quite as bad as when you were eating a regular meat-based diet. But also you can find deodorants that, and they're not antiperspirants, but they're deodorants that don't contain aluminum. And while we're talking about chemicals that are in deodorants, we'll also talk about some endocrine disrupting chemicals like parabens and phthalates and fragrances and plasticizers. And so some of these are also in skincare products and personal care products. And they can also increase your risk of cancers and also of conditions, because they're endocrine disrupting chemicals. They act kind of like estrogens in a way. They can also increase your risk of conditions like polycystic ovarian syndrome and endometriosis and things that might also cause you just to have some difficulties later in life, and some that might even lead to other more dangerous conditions. We know that people who have polycystic ovarian syndrome are more likely to be obese and to have an increased risk of uterine cancer and heart disease as well. So they're all sort of interconnected, and I think it's important to think about eliminating as many toxic exposures as possible, and we are really surrounded by them. So,
and just circling back to the deodorant, because they do hide aluminum. And I had one of my clients who, she just happens to live nearby me, and she came over. She's like, I got to show you this. And I said, okay. So she comes over and she shows me her armpit, and oh my God, it looked like her armpit was on fire. And I said, oh, what are you using? And she says, no, I got this at the local health food store. And I said, well, let's just talk about what you just said and what's wrong with that statement. Just because it comes from some place like Whole Foods or a wellness store doesn't mean that it's going to be healthy for you. And so what they do is they literally are hiding things. So she was using this deodorant, and it called, the name, if I forget what it was, but it talked about crystals. And so, and on the front, it said, aluminum chlorohydrate free, paraben free, this free, that free. So it made it sound like it was so healthy for you. No, because I looked on the back of it, and I said to her, you do know this has aluminum in it? And she said, no, it doesn't. It says right here. No, I said, let's be clear. It said it doesn't have aluminum chlorohydrate. And on the back, it said potassium alum. And potassium alum, and in parentheses, it said mineral salts. And potassium alum is short for potassium aluminum silicate. And so it is aluminum. It is getting into your body, and it's a problem. So I said to her, you just need to get rid of it. And she's like, but it says mineral salts. And I said, well, okay, arsenic is a mineral salt. And frankly, I wouldn't want to be consuming that. That's a problem. So, there's just some issues there where they're, purposely, it's a lot of smoke and mirrors, and they're hiding things into the personal care products. And so I really need women to take, charge. Another one that I'm very passionate about is parabens. And parabens in particular, your body thinks it's not. Your body thinks it's estrogen. So, Deborah, is that going to cause some issues if somebody has excess estrogen in their body?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, what the industry says, oh, but it's such a tiny amount. Well, okay. You're putting it on, a lot of times we put deodorant on every day. And so you want to make sure that, this is stuff that's building up and it's bioaccumulative. So it's a big issue and it's a problem. And so I cannot say enough about this. And I'm very big about getting these endocrines out of your system, or just these toxins in general, because we're being exposed through personal care products. We're being exposed through the environment per se. I mean, I came home one day, my husband is spraying pesticides on our driveway. And I said to him, "What are you doing?" And he says, "I'm killing the weeds." I said, "Where is our well?" And he's like, "It's right over there." And I said, "And you're spraying stuff that's right here next to our well." And he's like, "Oh, I shouldn't be doing this." I'm like, no, you should not be doing this.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Your husband?
My husband was doing, well, he doesn't do it now. He knows better because I will have an epileptic seizure. But I mean, this was in the beginning when we first started living together. And I'm like,
you can go down to your regular garden store and probably buy glyphosate, right?
Oh, you can buy Roundup. I mean, glyphosate's in Roundup, but I mean, I remember him using specifically. And I'm like, yeah, no, we're not putting glyphosate into our well. Thank you. Into the water that we're drinking. Thank you very much. No. So, that was a big deal for us. And I was very, disturbed. But, when you start to look at these chemicals and what they're doing to us, it's huge. It's huge. You and I were just on a webinar in between. We had a show at 12, and then we both had a webinar on chemical toxins and the impact on women and men conceiving. And it was pretty disturbing, as I'm listening to study after study after study after study after study. And it's like, oh, man, we need to stop. Anyway, but circling back to breast cancer, if you do get breast cancer, this is one of the things you really, really need to be careful of. And one of my clients that I was helping, I went over to her house and I'm like, she had just had a double mastectomy for breast cancer. She had just gone through tamoxifen, which was not effective. And I said to her, you can't be using these things. We literally had a trash dump can, big, huge trash can in the bathroom. And I'm going through the bathroom going, no, you can't have this. No, out, no, out, no, you can't. I'm like, did they not tell you any of this stuff? Did they not say anything that you cannot use things with parabens in it, that you can't use any of these endocrine disruptors? No. They just got me on, and that's what happens. And every person that I've dealt with that has had cancer they immediately get you. You're scared, number one. You're afraid, because we all know with a big C word, and how that has an impact on us. But when you're afraid, and they just get you on the medical treadmill, they start you on chemotherapy, radiation, surgery, and or any of the combination of those three. They never talk about diet. They never talk about foods that you should be consuming to help deal with cancer. They never talk about getting the endocrine disruptors out of your life, or things like these toxic chemicals that are in our everyday personal care products. And it makes me crazy when I see these people just applying this stuff, because literally 26 seconds, you put anything on your skin, it's in your bloodstream, 26 seconds. So you want to make sure, if you're using, circling back to the aluminum, you want to make sure that you're only using a deodorant, not a deodorant and an antiperspirant, okay? Because an antiperspirant means it's going to stop you from perspiring. So here's the problem with that, okay? So as you've got this going here and you're putting this on, you're clogging some pores that are mission critical, okay? And you don't want to be blocking these things. So you only want to choose a deodorant, which kind of makes it an environment so the bacteria can't grow underneath your armpit that's you're dealing, that causes the smell. But as Debra said, I hardly ever use deodorant anymore because, going plant-based, even if I do sweat, it's a clean smell, And so I usually don't. I mean, in the summertime, I might have a little bit more, but then I'm taking more showers and stuff like that. And soap and water is just great, to deal with that. But do you want to share anything?
Oh, just that there are now all kinds of products that will say that they are, you can understand all of the ingredients and that they are paraben free and unscented so I know that you also work with a company that has a line of products that are toxin free. And also if you look at the environmental working group, they have a whole section on personal care products. And so you can take that with you when you go shopping or when you're looking on Amazon, kind of looking back and forth and deciding what to buy. But there are definitely lots of options now that we might not have had many years ago.
Right. And if anybody wants to reach out to me, I'm happy to discuss, because these products meet my standards, as a former chemistry teacher. They meet my standards. And that's pretty much all I use from this point on. But I just want to talk a little bit down the road about the main hormone producing glands. And the main one is the hypothalamus, and that's responsible for your body temperature, hunger, moods, release of hormones from other glands, and also controls your thirst, sleep, and sex drive. And pituitary gland, the master control gland. The pituitary gland controls the glands that make the hormones that trigger growth. Then you've got the parathyroid, which controls the amount of calcium in the body. And I'm starting to learn how important this is. I mean, mission critical on so many different levels. Pancreas, it creates insulin that controls blood sugar levels. The thyroid, which I healed, for myself, healed my thyroid, which I was told flat out, you can't do that. Once it starts to go bad, that's it. You can't heal your thyroid. The adrenal glands, produce the hormones that control sex drive, cortisol, the stress hormone. You've got the ovaries, and these secrete estrogen, testosterone, progesterone, the female sex hormones, basically. And then the testes for men, they produce the male sex hormones, testosterone, and produce the sperm. All of these things are affected by these endocrine disruptors. So, when you stop to think about the female system, and I think this is one of the things that bothers me a lot, is they tend to compartmentalize the human body. We talk about the breasts, the ovaries, we talk about the heart, no, it's all part of one system. And so when you stop to look at the body itself in terms of one system, then you can step back and look more at the bigger picture of what it's doing to us. But a lot of these chemicals and a lot of the things that are in our environment are bioaccumulative and are accumulating in our fat cells, because we have two different types of chemicals. One is fat soluble, one's water soluble. If it's water soluble, you're peeing it out of your system. And it's fat soluble, hey, guess where it's going? Right into your fat cells. Just saying. Okay.
And the thing about this is that chemicals have been bioaccumulating up the food chain, not just in us, but in our environment. And so, for example, I think they're still finding DDT in our breast milk, in human breast milk. And the DDT has been banned for decades and decades. But also some of these chemicals are accumulating in animal flesh, and particularly in our seafood. Because the way the seafood chain works, the very tiny fish eat the plants, and then the larger fish eat the littler fish, and it goes on up. So when you get to some of the really large fish, like the king mackerel and the huge and the swordfish, they've accumulated, and tuna too, they've accumulated very high doses, amounts of mercury. And I had mercury poisoning twice from eating too much fish. I can assure you I was not eating swordfish. I was eating some tuna and some other fish as well. When I was on my way to becoming plant-based, I was eating much more fish at some point, and I had mercury poisoning twice. So, and mercury does have a half-life of about 90 to 100 days, so it slowly comes down, but it's definitely going to be hanging out in you and in your fetus as well. We definitely want to reduce. There's certain chemicals that are that have a shorter half-life, and you really want to think about getting those out of your body if you can before you get pregnant. So I've definitely checked women's mercury levels if they say that they're eating fish more than a few times a week before they get pregnant, to make sure, especially if they're having some of the higher mercury fish, so that we can make sure that their mercury levels are very, very low before you get pregnant. I know some of these patients would say, well, how much is a normal level? There is no normal level. I mean, we want it to be less than, I think it's a 4 is the amount that before you get pregnant. But really, there's no amount, again, mercury, like arsenic, like aluminum, there's no use for this in our bodies. It's just a toxin, and you want it to be as low as possible before you get pregnant. So these endocrine disrupting chemicals are also in our furniture, because a lot of them are flame retardants. That means they can be they can be also in the dust, which is another reason, possibly, especially if you've had cancer, then you might want to get an air purifier to make sure that you're getting some of these chemicals out of your air at home. And there may be even some that you can use in your car also, because some of these toxic materials might be used in your car. And lastly, in plastics, all kinds of plastics and plasticizers. And I wouldn't store my food in plastics. I would get glass now. And other endocrine disrupting chemicals are caused by the way we cook our food, actually. By the heterocyclic amines, for example, are endocrine disrupting, I believe are endocrine disrupting chemicals as well. But most of them are in our environment, and they're also in our food. So getting the toxins out, especially if you're worried about cancer, or if you're suffering from cancer now and really want to clean up your environment, then somebody who actually has a lot of good tips about this is Chris Wark, W-A-R-K. He has a book called Chris Beats Cancer, but he was a very young man who had, I believe, stage 3 colon cancer, and he beat it with a plant-based diet and other healthy lifestyle changes. And he talks a lot about cleaning up his environment as well as eating healthfully.
Absolutely. So mission critical. I can't say enough about that. I mean, and I see this day in it. Well, I used to, because I'm a former science teacher, but I would see it in the classroom, and I would see it with the kids. And so, I kind of grew up assuming that if it was on a shelf, someplace, wherever it was, somebody along the way had said, this is okay for human consumption. No, it's not. It's not okay. And so we need to use along the lines of the precautionary principle, which is used in Europe, which basically says you have to prove it's not toxic before you can, release this. So we don't do that. There's no regulation, zero, nothing in this environment. So they can put anything in these chemicals, and they do. And some of them cause some serious issues. So you really need to do, and you talked about the EWG, Environmental Working Group.org. They have a database called for environmental toxins for your cleaning products. They have that. They rate it on a scale of A to F. But they also have personal care products, which they rate on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being the best, 10 being the worst. So you want to definitely look at it. And they have an app called Healthy Living that you can download. But that's a lot of work, because I know it. I used to do this all the time. So if anybody wants to connect with me, you can message me through Simply Plant Based or thepregnancyadvantage.net and connect with me. And I can be happy to talk about, how you can get the toxins out of your personal care products without having to spend 4 hours trying to figure out, what's toxic, what's not. I found a company that's 100% toxic. And I love using the app Healthy Living. If you go into like a drugstore, and you take a screenshot of the barcode, and when you do that, it links you to the database in the EWG, and it links you to that database. And so you can look before you buy a personal care product, whether it's toxic or not toxic to you. So, it's something to work on and think about. And for sure, you want to definitely start cleaning it up, especially before you get breast cancer, because a lot of it is more preventative than, dealing with it once you do, get it. So
trying to be 100% toxin free, though, is probably going to be impossible in this world right now. And a lot of people live in areas where there's a huge amount of air pollution in city centers or by freeways. And there's a lot that we can't control. And some things you might find are too expensive to do. But whatever you can do, you just can't wait for the government to clean up its act, because it just isn't. As a matter of fact, under this administration, I think restrictions on pollutants have been lifted. So you can't really wait for that. And you can't wait for all the studies to come out to show that something is dangerous, because that may take a very long time. So I would use the environmental working group to support them if you can, and use their databases and just try to avoid as much as possible the plastics, the plasticizers, the parabens, the per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, which I believe are also in flame retardants. And gosh, I remember spraying clothing with that stuff. And the phthalates, the scents, and also it's in. I mean, you just have to buy products that are phthalate free and paraben free, right? That they're in nail polish too.
Check before you buy. It's called Healthy Living. It's an app from the EWG. So, right. Debra, once again, another fabulous show. Thank you so much for your time. I always learn so much from you.
And I from you as well. Thank you very, very much. Take care, everyone.
See you next week.
And exercise. Bye.